Hello, everyone. Doing something here a little bit different. In the past, I've covered some tabletop role-playing related content on here with my recommendations for role-playing games based on what video games you like or on certain anime or that sort of thing, or recommendations for anime based on what tabletop role-playing games you like. Um, but for the past few months, I have been running my first big RPG campaign in several years. Specifically, I'm running a Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. We'll see how well this shows up. In a moment, for Dungeons& and Dragons 5th edition. Now, we have started the game on the 2014 version of the rules because that was out, but our plan was starting with the 4th chapter, because by that point, everything, the new core rulebook should be out, we would shift to the 2024 version. So, as a thought, I decided to do a sort of video campaign diary. Basically inspired by Seth Skorkowski's campaign diary that he's done for Traveler, Cyberpunk, and Call of Cthulhu, discussing the bumps in the road that I've run into as somebody returning to the GM side of the screen for the first time in a while, along with like I was just discussing how things went with my players, all that sort of stuff. Though of course not without doing this without doing the costumes and backdrops, because I don't want to bite his style that much, and also because this backdrop, if you can't tell from how it's cutting out, it's because I'm using NVIDIA Broadcast instead of a real virtual green screen. But yeah, I am running Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen, with the nice fancy limited edition cover with Lord Soth on it. As of this recording, we have not actually started chapter 4 yet, outside of a little role play, so the next episode, which will be in several months because we do a monthly game, will be covering how that transition went. So this is going to be a fairly slow pace for these campaign videos. This one will be starting off with discussing the introduction and first chapter of the adventure, which provides an overview of the setting and character generation notes, along with, which is also where I'll talk about how much Dragonlance my players knew about going in, and then the second and third chapters, which starts the story proper. This review will have spoilers, so if someone's going to run this adventure for you, stop here, or else you are going to end up standing too close to a dying Bozak. Apologies to Seth there. The introduction is a mix of a big and small scale setting overview, covering the distant past with the Cataclysm, the return of Takesis and the rise of the Dragon armies, and a brief timeline of the first couple years of the War of the Lance, putting us semi-contemporaneous to the start of the original Dragonlance Chronicles series of novels and adventures. This does include a minor spoiler for the novels and adventures that Kitiara Uthmithar, the childhood friend of the Heroes of the Lance, has become the commander of the Blue Dragon Army, so if you are planning to run the Dragonlance Chronicles adventures later, whether for 5th edition or earlier or for a different system entirely, and you're planning to copy and paste this section of the adventure into a player's pack, I recommend omitting the names of other commanders from the Dragon armies to save that twist for later. We also get a kind of 1,000-foot overview of the geographic region of Ansalon where this particular adventure is set, along with some information on the gods of Kryn, both should your party contain a cleric, or just if you want to know who else is out there besides, Paladin and Takis. This is all useful for the adventure itself, but it runs a little short if you're planning to run anything else in Kryn. I bring this up because the back of the book includes both a single page and large fold-out map of the entire continent of Ansalon, which is perfect if you're planning to, run the Dragonlance Chronicles campaign or do more stuff with the characters contributing to the War of the Lance after the main story has finished. Not to get too ahead of things here, the end of the adventure does have a hook that ties things into the Blue Dragon Army as a potential future antagonist. So if you're if you are planning to pick up this book for intent to use it as a Dragonlance campaign setting reference, it's still worth picking up because it's got monster stats and stats for a few significant NPCs like Lord Soth. But I would also recommend picking up Fizban's Guide to Dragons and getting the third edition, third or 3.5, I forget exactly where it came in the timeline, edition Dragonlance setting books. In addition to the conversions of the classic Dragonlance Chronicles Adventure Path for that system, rather than using the standard version. Chapter 1 of the adventure gets into what your players need to play the game. You get notes on the peoples of Quern, along with the three main cultures, Elven cultures rather, Sylvanesti, Qualinesti, and Kaganesti, plus some notes on the Dargonesti and Daimonesti for Sea Elves. The book doesn't talk much about races outside of, humans, elves, dwarves, Kender, and gnomes. But ended up ruling that most of the playable races for D&D 5th edition were available, with only really Dragonborn being off limits because of how they don't really fit in with Draconians. There's also additional class options, particularly related to the Knights of Solamnia and the Orders of High Sorcery. The second chapter is the actual prologue to the adventure itself, giving a plot hook to bring the party together. That they're all friends of a local folk hero, Ispen Greenshield, who has since passed away, and they're all invited to his funeral, which coincides with the local annual festival, along with a few little origins events to use with characters with divine or arcane backgrounds, along with a combat encounter. Think of these sort of like the life path events from Cyberpunk 2077. Of these, the weakest of them, unfortunately, is the one for divine characters, which has them stumbling into a shrine and being told by their patron deity that their power is being bestowed onto them, and they should go forth into the world and slam evil. It is basically just a vignette to have a player get talked at, as opposed to talked to, for a bit, and ultimately, I didn't end up using it. The player who ended up playing a cleric had a backstory where I didn't need to use this vignette. And our sidekick characters, well, I brought up in passing with them on the road, kind of described it, but didn't go into too much detail. Speaking of which, let's talk about our characters. Our characters are Dristan Silverheart, an Aasimar paladin with the Knight of Solamnia background. Dristan's partner, played by the player's IRL partner, Isolt de Lorimar, is a warlock with the noble background. Both of their oaths are to each other, which works for me and is cute from a romantic standpoint. We have Fletch Cianundel, a Qualinesti ranger with the folk hero background because he badly injured a monster some people thought was a dragon due to a well-aimed shot, but he knows it wasn't a dragon that he hit, and he's got a bit of imposter syndrome related to that. They are joined later in sessions 4 and 5 by Sabelina, a cleric of Gillian, god of knowledge. Sabelina's player picked the acolyte background, and considering the nature of who Gillian is, I figured that they were one of the few gods where their clergy would continue in their duties after the cataclysm, and one of the few, like reorcs, where the people would be less likely to aggressively turn on them after the cataclysm, so we put together a backstory explanation based on. The rulebook also contains notes for sidekicks to round out any deficiencies in the party. As Sabelina joined several sessions in, and I didn't know who her player was going to play in terms of character classes, I used two of the sidekicks who had healing magic, Rig Roundrook and Tem Tremble, a Dwarven Cleric and Kender Druid, respectively. I was intending to replicate the Flint and Tasselhoff duo, but it kind of ended up working out that way. These sidekicks are statted out as NPCs. They do not have class levels. The last part of the prologue chapter is an optional fight against a group of Draconians who attacked a wagon and some Solamnic knights along the road. They've already successfully killed the knights at the time the party comes on them, and the encounter begins. I would consider this fight somewhat mandatory. My players had little, for a few reasons. First off, my players had little to no knowledge of Dragonlance going in. Tristan's player had some knowledge of Kender in prior editions having kleptomaniac tendencies, and they knew about Raistlin being the archetypal brooding goth wooby mage, but that's kind of it. They knew about the setting in terms of like the actual setting was introduced in the prologue chapter and how I included, and in the way it was included in the player's pack, and they didn't know anything about Draconians in particular. That is, so that honestly, either your players know about Draconians from having done Dragonlance before, and their big Dragonlance heads. There have been tweaks in how Draconian death throws work in 5th edition, and so this makes for a good refresher. In particular, basically Draconians effectively blow up. Not like explode in a fireball, some do, but their death throes effects are more an area effect radiance thing. So, for example, if you kill a boss, that has a petrification gas that comes out of them when they die, as opposed to just they turn to stone and your weapon is immobilized, or you're just causing to be effectively disarmed until the draconian crumbles to dust and you can get your sword back. Um, this leads into this fight being rather tricky for a first level party. You're going up against a Capac who has acid death throws, plus 4 Baz Draconians with the petrification, and all of these guys are effectively fanatical. Not effectively, they are fanatical combatants. They do not have to do morale saves to retreat, and they all have 2 attacks per round. And 2 attacks per round, if you double crit, that can kill a 3rd level character. It nearly did later on in this portion of the adventure that we're covering this episode. And this is a fight for 1st level characters. So this is something to keep in mind. Possible ways to even the odds for the players. What I did is I decided that, for a couple of reasons, to have Murphy's first law of combat apply to draconian death throws. If you're not familiar with Murphy's laws of combat, rule 1 is friendly fire isn't. Specifically, if the boss can be potentially immobilized, not necessarily have them go through full petrification, fail all the saving throws, but temporarily immobilized, then that shows the players what the effects of the boss's death throw gas is. Which otherwise, because if you make your save, nothing happens, then that means the players would miss that information. So the players still get that. Additionally, it's important to mention, I'm running all of this online. We are using Foundry. And so this is my first time running a game with Foundry. This was everyone else's first time playing with Foundry. So we're all learning the ropes, so to speak, of the system. And so I wanted to even things up a little bit in terms of allowing opportunity to make. As it was, again, we were running this, the players were also effectively outnumbered. We had 3 characters at this time. Sebellini does not join until much later. And we had the 2 sidekicks, which yes, they provide healing, but they also are also mechanically, functionally NPCs. They don't gain levels in classes. They don't gain levels in cleric. They don't gain levels in druid. Actually, they do gain levels. They do get spells, but from how they are handled mechanically in the system and in Foundry, they aren't actual player characters in that respect. After this, these rule book as your characters level up to level 2 if you're using the waypoint or plot progression system. Otherwise, if you go you skip this entirely, start at level 2 completely. Which also, again, give characters a chance at level 1 to do some stuff. Nice way to do things. Chapter 3, When Home Burns, starts with the PCs arriving in the town of Vogler, where the funeral and the unrelated annual festival will be held. Because of the setup encounter, the party ended up going directly to the mayor at the inn, the Brass Crab, to deliver the news. They also met Cudgel, the leader of the mercenary band who was in town to take part in the Mark battle that's part of the festival, and Becklin, a retired Solamnic knight. After conveying the news, Cudgel said she'd send some men to investigate in the morning, and the player characters went to bed. The next day, the players explored the town, got to know the townsfolk, and prepared for both the funeral and the festival, ending with the wake that night. Kristen's player had retrieved the armor from the knights and wanted to see if it could be made usable, which got them introduced to the local Tinker Gnome, Than, which also led to me introducing the concept of Tinker Gnomes and Tinker Gnome Society, including Mount Nevermind and, more significantly for the plot, the Gnome Flinger and the Neri Crash. The players loved this. They thought this was great. They ate it up from a comedic standpoint and interesting setting bits. So that worked well there. Tristan's player left the Solamnic armor with Than to try and make it, and I, giving warnings in advance that gnomes will try to improve things, had him improve it by putting rings in the armor that you could run fabric through and tie off pouches containing potions and other supplies to, basically turning this into giving the armor 90s tactical pouches, or the potential to have 90s tactical pouches. Tristan's player thought it was funny. Tristan, the character, obviously, and appropriately, didn't like it. That was kind of the point. The first session wrapped with the funeral for Ispin along with the wake, which allowed for more roleplay with telling stories about Ispin, with the players also getting introduced to Lord Bakaris the Elder and his fail son, Bakaris the Younger, both entitled asses. The older, a entitled ass who grew up in privilege and thought money could solve everything, but he's older and he thinks he needs to be more responsible, feels a degree of responsibility, but again, still feeling entitled. And Bakaris the Younger, who is a spoiled brat entitled ass. In the wake, I also introduced the story of Lord Soth through a mysterious Sylvanesti minstrel who sang the song telling of Lord Soth's legend in Sylvanesti, which a couple of characters picked up on, but didn't quite get into the full details because they spoke different dialects. The next session started with the festival, the players going around, socializing with food and drink, including cock-blocking Bakaris the Younger, and taking part in a fishing competition before the actual tourney. The tourney in the past has been a mock battle between the townsfolk and the mercenaries, recreating a historical battle where a group of Salamdic knights fought off a group of bandits, allowing the town to grow and thrive. However, here, things go pear-shaped when one of the members of Kojal's company, an ogre named Dragonlance, along with some of his cronies, had been subverted by the approaching forces of the Red Dragon army. So not long after the tourney begins...
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal!
The fight itself is meant to be the first instance where the Game Master uses the battle event table, a table with a list of random events to indicate chaotic things are happening off camera during the fight if you're not using the mass combat miniatures wargame rules, which I'm not because I'm using Foundry, so not applicable to grab the box of that out from under the out from somewhere and set that up on the table for this encounter. And this can take the form of additional combatants, whether for the opponents or for the allies, or just general set dressing. I didn't use it in this fight, and only partly use it next time it comes up because it's kind of messy to use. This is a case where, like, it would work better for me to use this if there was a Foundry plugin that I could run that handles this resolution automatically. I don't have that, so I only ended up rolling that when I remembered at the start of at the start of the the second round in the actual defense, the final part of the with delaying with action strategic withdrawal at the end of this chapter. And honestly, I only did it the one time because I forgot all the other times. I got enough things to juggle as a game master as it is. It's quite easy for that to slip through the cracks. In any case, I ran into something here which I didn't quite realize with the 5e rules. That paladins with Smite can be as much of a DPS character as rogues. Tristan took out Dragonlance is meant to be something about boss of this encounter with his initial attack on a Smite. Now, he's not totally wasted as a character. Tristan's how do you want to do this didn't end up actually killing him, just chopping off an arm. So I didn't get a chance to save him for later. The session ended with Dragonlance and his bodyguard unit having escaped, but some of his cronies still have been captured, and spilling the beans that Dragonlance had a major patron who's going to be nearby, leading to me describing a cutscene with the Red Dragon Army's camp. At this point, the party levels up again to level 3. I also played at this point, at the end of that session, the Next Time music from the Record of Lotus War OVA. I meant to play it again at the end of session 4, but forgot due to some of the trickiness of how the session ended up being structured. Focus of session 3 was planning the evacuation of the town, with Pudgel's troops and the town militia both having reduced strength due to what happened at the tourney becoming an actual battle. And in the midst of this, we had an envoy with the Red Dragon Army showing up demanding that the army be put up in the town, and the player characters using the Gnome Flinger and the Nary Crashes to sneak up above and behind the scouts that weren't left behind by the envoy to take them out so we could prepare to evacuate in peace. In particular, I didn't need any prompting to get them to use the Gnome Flinger. My players remembered it and came up with an idea on their own after I'd introduced it earlier. So it goes to show that if you can sow the seeds of a dangerous, crazy-ass plan for your players, you could be not to say confident, but you can hopefully trust that your players will make sure that that crazy-ass plan grows to fruition. In all, the party was on their own able to scrape together through various checks and asking around and roleplay enough boats to evacuate the whole town, with the players, the militia, taking on the back rank of a delaying action, with Cudgel's mercenaries serving to harry the Red Dragon's advance. And it kind of being explicitly stated that part of their plan was that they were going to, rather than withdrawing back and joining the evacuation with the boats, that they were going to grab it and kind of scatter to draw off additional troops to pursue them as part of the delaying action. And that delaying action came up in sessions 4 and 5. With the players, now at this point, we are joined by Sebelina and her player, fighting various groups of Red Dragon Army troops as they did fighting withdraw as the townfolk were evacuated. This included the return of Gorgonus, now with a shield attached to his stump, and joined by several Draconians rather than mercenaries this time. And once again, he got one shot by a smite. This time, the Draconians left him to crawl off and die. I did put an interlude in here in session 4 with the players seeing 3 spectral knights, specifically Lord Soth and 2 lieutenants, though the characters couldn't get a good look at them, watching the battle on horseback from the bluff overlooking the town. The final battle of the chapter puts the players up against a boiler drac, a gnomish construct that's been commandeered by the Red Dragon army that is functionally a flamethrower tank, here crewed by 4 Draconians. I ran this fight as written in the adventure, which means I was also using the map as provided by the adventure. Except this map is, in hindsight, way too claustrophobic for the boiler drac and accompanying forces. In particular, it limits alternative ways for the players to approach the boiler drac to try and attack it and deal damage to it, which, considering that the boiler drac deals enough damage with a direct hit to kill any 3rd level character outright, is not great. I bring this up because when I ran this adventure, it had been purchased and have been using. I currently am still using it. I'll be using it for all the subsequent adventures, sessions. A map pack created by Tessa Moorcroft for this adventure that purchased FDM's Guild to provide battle maps for this adventure for VTT platforms. And that included several alternative maps for the siege of Vogler. And a couple of them are fit for this battle at the docks with the boiler drac, which gives you a bigger open space, which allows for more tactical options for the boiler drac itself to maneuver and for the players to have to approach it from different angles to try and mitigate the whole situation of it being a flamethrower tank with dealing enough damage from its direct flamethrower assault to kill any 3rd level character outright in a single attack. So that having that option would work really well. As it stands, earlier the map I had there was the map that's from the book, and it's way too claustrophobic. The way things went was, once again, we had another smite from Driston that basically ended up taking out the boiler drac. In this case, part of it was what I'd done after much deliberation is decide, okay, we're in a tight, confined environment. There's not a lot of ways to approach the boiler drac from flanking positions. You can only really attack it from head on, where what if it fires, it will kill you. To add opportunities to have the boiler drac blow up, because the way it's written in the rules is the boiler drac is a object with 4 characters in the forms again of the Draconians crewing it, and there is a chance when firing that the boiler drac will you roll a d20. If you roll a 1, the boiler drac misfires and blows up with a 30-foot radius explosion. What ended up happening is Driston, because there was an enemy boss next to it, a Viewmaster Togue, I think his name. It was another ogre. Attacks Viewmaster, climbing on top of him with intent to push him into the boiler track to try and damage it as part of this. And so the thought I would have was, okay, if you if the boiler track took damage, then it would, depending on like how many like hits and how much damage it had taken, I would roll additional dice. Like give it additional disadvantage, give it more opportunities to roll that natural one. And Tristan's thought was, okay, I'm going to jump onto the ogre and try and push it into the boiler track to try and kind of knock it out of aim. Either force it to take an additional action to aim again or to damage it further. So, all right, okay, go for your attack, and then we'll roll and compete if you hit, we'll do a contested athletics check to see, based on the grappling rules, if you're able to push Viewmaster Toad properly. So what happened was Tristan critted, dealt enough damage to kill Viewmaster Toad, who'd taken some damage already. Took it, but not a lot, like 8 damage. 8, 10, 12 damage, something like that. Kill Viewmaster outright. So I went, okay, let's just roll the athletics check anyway. Uncontested this time. We'll just come up with a target number. And he rolled a natural 20 again. And from what I went, okay, you hit the barrel. You push Master Toad into the barrel of the boiler track. At which point I had the Draconians inside roll perception checks to see if the barrel had been damaged. The barrel had been damaged, they pile out, and we have to fight them off piecemeal. They all failed the perception check, so they went to fire, and the boiler track blew up. With the positions that characters nearest to the boiler track and the blast radius were in, they all had an obstruction between them and the boiler track, so I gave them advantage and save negates on the reflex save, and they all succeeded. So that went really well. For the party, we did nearly lose at this point. We nearly lost Hrig. This is where I mentioned talking about how a Boss Draconian can nearly, if they double crit, can nearly kill a third level character. Hrig got double critted by a Boss and nearly died. And had like 1 or 2 hit points left. Fortunately for him, which I wasn't sure if this was going to happen or not because he's a sidekick character, the party basically immediately went and dumped a bunch of healing onto Hrig. I had given him like a little bit of healing because Tem came before that, and she used a healing word, so he was kind of back in the fight. But everyone else piled healing onto Hrig and brought him basically back to full, which was very impressive. I wasn't expecting that. After that, we had some role play after the evacuation with the players of the refugees going downstream to the fields outside the city of Calaman, with them getting set up and then being deputized by the mayor to go into Calaman, speak to the governor to secure supplies and that sort of thing. And this led to a little bit more role play with our aristocratic spoiled brat Failsons, the Bakaris the Older and his rich, entitled dad, Bakaris the Elder. But that's kind of how we wrap the setting up there. In all, the players have enjoyed this portion of the adventure. This part is very clearly meant to be very linear, to set a series of events in motion based on the concept of, like, there are certain things that you're expecting with Dragonlance, and one of them is you have to have your hometown get burned by the dragon armies. And this isn't their character's hometown. It feels like it's like Vogler serves a similar purpose to something like a solace in the core Dragonlance Chronicles game. It's a quiet, peaceful peaceful town that people call home. Nobody was too involved in the affairs of the world, and then the armies of Hakisis roll in and wreck everything for everyone. So that's how this wrapped up. In a few months, when we do the next video, I will talk about, okay, how that transition to 2024 rules worked, and also what happens in Chapter 4 when things get a little more open-ended. Again, I will have links in the show notes below for where you can get Moorcroft's map pack and the 3rd edition Dragonlance material as affiliate links from Dungeon Masters Guild / DriveThruRPG. I do recommend picking those up, especially Moorcroft's map pack, if you are going to run this adventure through a virtual tabletop. Or even if you're using a virtual tabletop software as an assistant or running a game on a physical table yourself, or printing out the maps or that sort of thing. Honestly, I think that in particular, the last encounter is a significant improvement with the assistance of her maps.
Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, and also consider backing my Patreon. Patreon backers get episodes up to 1 week early of this show and any future Let's Plays. Also, please consider backing my Ko-fi. Toss me a few bucks also helps support the show, and it's not a monthly obligation or anything like that.